All right. I think we can go ahead and start, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining today's consultation on the Just Energy Transition IP. We have a number of consultations that are going to be coordinated by the Presidential Climate Commission that will be interrogating the JET IP. And we'll be looking at various aspects of the investment plan, what we feel are gaps and areas that need to be further strengthened leading up to the implementation of the actual investment plan. So just by way of context, colleagues will remember that for the broader amount of 2022, there was a lot of discussions post Glasgow 26, looking at the Just Energy Transition Partnership between South Africa and the various IPG governments that sponsored the 8.5 billion that was allocated to assist South Africa transition to a low carbon economy. There were a number of developments that took place there. There was huge dissatisfaction from cohorts in society and various stakeholders, Labour being one of them, feeling that there just wasn't the level of consultation that we would have liked to be able to input and make substantive contributions to the actual investment plan. I think this is why this discussion has now taken place post COP27, where the presidency mandating the Presidential Climate Commission to hold a number of consultations, looking into the IP and also building up towards the actual implementation plan. So that's basically the context that brings us today. Colleagues will have probably seen the JET IP in its various forms. They're probably interrogated with the presentations at one place or another. There will be another presentation that will be done today. Really, the plea in today's meeting is let's be as robust as possible. Let's interrogate the various aspects of the investment plan, and there will be a various amount of gaps, and I think we should be able to raise those issues in today's meeting. Without any further ado, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Comrade Enos, am I being called to order already in the introduction and welcome?
No. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not calling you to order, but I just thought maybe before we start, on the context that you have put there, that it be clear, we, as organized labor, because that is what I come as today, we don't have any problem doing the consultation, but we needed to raise up front that there is something wrong with the way in which we are doing it, or that we've done it. Consultation on its own is about meaningful influence. So if it is about meaningful influence, it should be done in such a way that it doesn't look like a tick box exercise. Just before COP27, there was a rush over the IP, JET IP. And I'm sure nobody can say there was a meaningful consultation, because there was no space to make input before it even went to COP 27. I don't know if it is 27, yeah. And you know almost how our consultation goes. According to Organized Labour, we use that definition of consultation from ILO. It can be after things have been presented or have been accepted or adopted by cabinet, that then we begin to interrogate. It is with the hope that the interrogation will bring us something, which I would doubt if they've already adopted the JET IP in its raw form, as it were. So that is the point that I'm trying to raise here. I do understand that we may be saying we will follow the agenda in a certain way, but I thought it was important Also that some of the documents that we got, which are supplementary, we got them last night. You know, we've got to study the documents, each and every page, and understand each and every line, so that we give meaningful influence. So I think that is where I think we need to jack up. I do understand that if you say this is not going to be a conclusive meeting today, I would understand. But if it were to be the only meeting before the recommendations are taken up, then I've got an issue with that. I just thought I needed to raise that so that upfront it be known that the consultation needs to be meaningful, and we don't believe we followed that path. And lastly, this is about procedural justice. And if we get it wrong with organized labor, then it means they will not be able to, we will not be able to define just transition correctly. Thank you.
All right. Comrades, thanks, Enos, for Comrade Enos for raising the points. Comrades, I'm going to request us to do the following. I see that there are a number of hands that are raised, but there is a dedicated session, comrades, that's going to talk to this issue of the JIP. There's dedicated time to talk about this. This is not the only agenda item on today's discussion. We're also going to have a discussion in terms of the Presidential Climate Committee's energy processes, and we'll be taking you through the Just Transition Implementation Framework. After that, we're going to have a discussion in terms of the JIP. We're going to dedicate time specifically for that. And the points that Comrade Enos is raising, very legitimate, by the way, concerns, and they must be raised in today's meeting. This is why this dedicated session for organized labor has been set aside. And in our facilitated plenary discussion, comrades, that is where we'll be able to raise those particular points. So I'm going to ask Comrade Tengo, Comrade Peggy, Comrade Barry, Comrade Wandisile to please maybe reserve those hands up until we have that particular discussion, comrades, just so that we can honor the flow of the actual program, so that we're able to raise those at that particular time. Is that okay? Comrade Tengo, I see your hand is still up. Can I leave the process as that? Tengo, are you there?
Yeah, comrade, I think the issue is about the status of the meeting. You see, before we can continue and all of that, but we've got to be clear about the nature of the meeting. You see, that's the meeting with regards to consultation, because we can't be, you know, the reason we didn't want to have the commission in the manner in which it's run now was to avoid situations like this. We don't know what is the nature of this consultation. We must be clarified first on that.
Yes, Tengo, hence I'm saying you need to allow the JIP discussion to take place first, because in that discussion, all these questions will be answered. There is going to be a presentation, and it's going to talk about the status of the investment plan, where it is, and where are the areas for us to then come in and have this consultation that you are asking for. So I'm also saying that this is not the only item that we are discussing here today, comrades. We're discussing two issues, the JIP being another issue. But I'm going to request that allow us to go through the program. And when we get to the issue of the JIP, comrades, we raise all of these issues, because like I said, they do have a bearing, and they are valid questions. Comrade Wandisile, is there something that you would like to raise?
Yes.
And after that, comrades, can I request that we please get into because I want to afford us enough time to have the discussion, particularly on the investment plan. But go ahead.
Thanks, Lebogang. No, just one issue. Mbodi would have raised key things, you know, in relation to how, you know, this consultation is being done. I mean, the political declaration of, you know, this 8.5 billion rand spoke about a full involvement of organized labor, you know, in the transition to low carbon and climate resilient economy. Now, that was the beginning of, I think, late 2021. The entire 2022, organized labor is not involved in developing, the JET IP. And only after it's finished, it's an end product of it. And in fact, which has got a lot of flaws, by the way. You begin to question then, what is our role in consultation if at the end of it, you are roping in organized labor, to consult? Because I believe consultation, the expectation is that you are going to advance alternative proposals from us as well. Now, the manner at which this is being done, I don't think, it's conducive for us to even begin to call this a consultation. I mean, such an important document which plots the future about, the energy future for many workers located in Mpumalanga, who today don't even know what will happen to them, in the near future. In the, challenge that we have as a country, such as load shedding, don't you think that the virtual platform then creates a problem for other workers who wants to participate in this? In fact, it is a well-known fact that, in times where we are being load shed, the strength of the network is low. In some instances, I might not hear you. So this begs a question about, really about your commitment to consult with organized labor over this platform, because I believe if indeed you want a full participation of organized labor, this meeting should be physical. This meeting should be allocated for quite a number of days to take us through. I'll pause there for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Wansley. Maybe just in terms of background. So the PCC did try to have a hybrid setup for today's meeting. Unfortunately, the venue that was booked, when there is load shedding, the generator doesn't have an inverter. So as a result, they would encounter technical difficulties. And when they did try to procure other venues, unfortunately, they were fully booked today. And the feeling from the Secretariat of the Presidential Climate Commission was that to proceed and have today's meeting virtually. Comrades, I hear all of the points. I really do. And let me commit to say this. You are quite correct. The manner in which things have done, the way things were done was just not correct. In terms of consultation and the way that we used to consultation, this was not correct. It was a box ticking exercise. You're very correct, and I'll be upfront when I say that I think these were the sentiments that were raised prior to COP27. But let me just say this then. I'm going to allow for the first presentation to happen. Let's let the first presentation happen. Let's get inputs, and then after that, let's get into this discussion that comrades are talking about now, and then let's make those inputs, colleagues, and then we will take a way forward from that. I don't want to preempt the discussion though. So without any further ado, because I do want to allow a significant amount of time to be spent in terms of the discussion on the JET IP, I will request first that we hand over to Steve Nichols. Comrade, is there a point that I neglected to make?
Yes, Lebohang. Just one issue. Comrade Mboti would have alluded to the fact that the documentation was sent late.
Yes.
And to an extent, if you want full participation from organized labor, it is a norm that you should, allow enough time for other parties to go through, the resources and also, to participate meaningfully in this discussion. So it is apparent to me that you are so in a hurry to allow the presentations without, tackling, through the issue that you raised. So basically what you are doing is that I've heard you, let's proceed. And to us, it does not sit okay, because we've raised the issue about arranging the venue. But today, was it the only day that was allocated? Which then brings me to another issue. It appears there are stipulated time frames which you need to do this within, without considering us. So that's why I'm saying I would have thought this meeting is going to maybe lay out a roadmap on how the consultation is going to pan out, not to take us through the presentation. to me, I will be pleased if you are going to take us through a roadmap to say, this is how we are planning to do this date and this date and this date. But in this way, if other parties are saying the documents was sent late, how do you expect them to participate meaningfully in these discussions? To me, that's not a fair consultation on our side. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thanks, Wandisi. Colleagues, I'm not rushing through this process. My view is that we've waited to have this consultation. We were grieved because we were not consulted. And I do recognize the issues. The documents were sent late. I do recognize the issues that we are not able to have other comrades in a face-to-face setup. I do acknowledge all of those issues, comrades. I'm not brushing these issues on the side. They are serious issues for us to consider. What I am trying to get us towards is a opportunity for us at least to have an initial discussion, comrades. This discussion is long overdue, and it's not a discussion that can continue to be kicked down the road. It's something that we need to have a discussion on, even if it is just an initial conversation. But let me hand over to Secretariat maybe to respond to some of these questions, and then we can take it from there. But the issue here, comrades, is that we should at least have an initial discussion on this investment plan. Us not having an organized, constructive discussion on this investment plan, it leaves us on the outside of the consultation, which is the exact issue that we raised when this issue went to COP27 without us giving the final buy-in on the process. That's why, for me, it really is essential that we do at least have an initial session, even if we don't want to consider it being an actual consultation, but it is important that we have that initial session and raise our points. Steve?
Yeah, good afternoon again, everyone. Yeah, the points are well made. I think that it might be useful just to put it in the broader context of the consultations we've been having, both on the energy recommendations report that the commissioners are writing and the JET IP. So we had a number of these consultations last year, and we're very happy to have more. So there are also two consultations happening with locally based workers and communities, one in Lephalale and one in Mpumalanga. And we will share the dates for those in the chat. I'll ask my colleague Simpiwe to do that. But we're also very happy to organize a second session where you've had more notice. And we did send out the documents last week, so slightly better than last night, but recognize that's also not a huge amount of notice. And the JET IP itself has been available on the web for a couple of months now. So we hope that we can engage constructively with you, and maybe, as you said, Lebogang, we can use this session as a sort of kick-off session, looking at the presentation that we sent out, and then preparing for a longer session that will be both face-to-face and online.
Can I maybe request that we do something a bit differently, Steve? Can we maybe then change the structure of the agenda? I don't know, is the finance task team online already? I think let's push up the discussion on the JET IP to be first on the agenda. I can tell comrades really want to discuss this issue, and it is a burning issue. I'm not separate from comrades. I'm also from Organised Labour. Comrades, I'm from COSATU. So this is a burning issue, and probably something that we just need to have an open and upfront conversation on. Things didn't go right, and we must acknowledge these from the beginning. And what I'm sensing from the initial inputs now is that this is probably the burning issue that we need to address first and foremost. I'm upsetting the program a bit here, but I request that we do that. And I'm not brushing off the issues of additional meetings. Steve, you are committing that there can be additional meetings, face-to-face meetings, to allow more time to interrogate the document so that they can be significant discussion. And maybe let's not call this session a consultation. Let's call this an initial meeting with Organised Labour, and we allow for subsequent meetings so that we can have more discussion on this issue, because this is clearly a burning issue for Organised Labour. Comrade Trevor, let me check with you, and then after that, I request that we then get into the presentation in terms of the JIP so that we can make our inputs there. I'm seeing more hands. The more I give people an opportunity to talk, I'm getting more hands. Comrade Trevor. Okay, it's Comrade Trevor, Comrade Doc, and then Comrade Mac, and then after that, may I request that we please get into the presentation of the JIP. Trevor, over to you.
Thanks, Lebogang. I just wanted to raise two things. The first one is that we, as SAFTU, did not receive an invitation. It's the first one. And because of that, we also did not get an agenda. Secondly, whilst comrades are complaining about the documents being sent late, to us, they were never even received. They were never even sent. So I wanted to register this formally in the meeting, but also to request that next time you are able to send all the required information, necessary information to the General Secretary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Secretariat, I hope you are also noting that for SAFTU to be able to participate in this meeting. Thank you very much, Comrade Trevor, and apologies for that oversight. Comrade Doctor.
Good afternoon, comrades. I hope I'm audible.
Audible.
Yes, man. Comrades, no, man, it's just a concern that we also received the invite late last night and there's no documentation. And so we are viewing our participation in this meeting will be kind of within the brackets because now we'll just be listening. We'll have no position, we'll have no inputs as NVM. And so we are concerned to say, more especially when this is consultation, and how do you diverse and just change it to be whatever you just mentioned to be what kind of a meeting, whereas the status of the invite, it says is consultation. That's our concern. Thank you.
Noted. And I think that's why I've acknowledged that because of the various issues that we've raised, we can then say that this was indeed a consultation. Comrade Mac.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Lebo, and greetings to all the comrades. I think what comrades are raising here, and I'm not sure where, as a chair, are you missing what seems to be coming from the comrades is that the one thing that is not clear is the status of this meeting. Status in a sense that me and you knows very well that in any commission's meeting we are commissioners and yet you are sharing this meeting today. What role are we expected to play here and other commissioners who are here coming from organized labor? But the second issue is that clearly the issue of documents that were circulated late is an issue here. And I don't know how do we expect leadership from trade unions who are here today to meaningfully, influence the presentations here without having gone through the documents themselves. I think that's going to create a problem for this meeting. I thought that we will. I think from your side, you really want to consider what the leadership is saying here about, the fact that documents were received late. It means that, they did not go through the documents or the presentations that is about to be presented here. And I think that will render, this meeting, not fruitful. So my suggestion is that can't we reconsider rescheduling this meeting just to allow the leadership an opportunity to go through what needs to be looked at, and then reschedule a meeting and allow comrades to participate. Otherwise, I don't see us getting anything out of this meeting today.
Thanks, Comrade Mike. Can I invite the Secretariat to have maybe some reflections in terms of the comments that are coming through here today? My plea is that we receive the presentations, even if it is not a case of having the meaningful consultation today, but let us not deny the other comrades who do want to listen to the presentations here today. I want to invite the Secretariat to have an input on this. Comrades, I'm allowing this discussion to happen because it's important. As the PCC, we committed to procedural justice. And if there is a feeling that the manner in which we've convened today's meeting is not allowing for that procedural justice to happen, it is important that we reflect on that. But bearing that in mind, comrades, I also do feel that there is 95 of us on the platform. There may be a feeling that we should maybe go through and receive the presentation, even if we can change the status of the meeting to say it's an initial meeting to get initial reflections, and it's not called a consultation meeting. Can I allow members from Secretariat? I see Deepak, your hand is up.
Thank you very much, Chair. I see the Executive Director of the Secretariat is also here, so perhaps he wants to follow on. But my starting point is precisely the issue that you raised, and that is we are fundamentally committed to procedural justice, that we want to ensure that consultations are not only meaningful and thorough, but they are bidirectional. By that I mean, while there might be presentations to be made, we do not preempt what the discussion and the outcomes with respect to response to those presentations should be. The other point I'd like to make is that the PCC did not formulate the JET IP. The JET IP was formulated through initially the partnership group with the international partners, but secondly, then taken through a governance process where, yes, colleagues and comrades are correct, it was adopted by the cabinet, but the president indicated when he launched the investment plan in December, prior to COP27, that the PCC is now mandated to undertake a series of and a thoroughgoing process of stakeholder consultations domestically. So one may argue that the investment plan, the JET IP, is now cast in concrete. As a PCC, we do not think that that is the case. Having said that, I think we must also acknowledge that there's a lot of content which reconciles both the political economic objectives of the country as well as the energy path that we need to undertake. And similar to the plea that you've made, we should, whether we rename this particular engagement or not, we should at least give people who've made this time in their diary the opportunity to receive the presentation and then commit to one of two things or both. One, a follow-up session where we can take feedback and have a proper dialogue around the issues contained in the JET IP. But secondly, also time to be given to the various confederation of unions or individual unions applying their mind to what they hear in this presentation today to then make written submissions to us as the PCC. From the PCC side, we integrated this session because we felt that the energy and mixed dialogue around a just transition pathway is integrally linked to what the JET IP presupposes as a set of things that need to be achieved by 2030. The last point I want to make, and maybe I'll make that if the conversation is allowed to proceed, is that we must separate between the JET IP, which takes a view of what the country needs to do to reconcile socioeconomic progress and our climate objectives from $8.5 billion, which were part of the JET partnership with the International Partners Group. And this presentation, if it is allowed to happen, will then also show that while there's an integral link between 8.5 billion and the JET IP is in fact to be owned by the country as we proceed with our just energy transition. So in conclusion, I want to say that the PCC is on mandate from the President, hosting a series of engagements, including with Labour and other stakeholders. And we're doing that firstly from a point of being agnostic, but secondly, from an absolute sincere commitment to ensuring that the process is true to procedural justice principles that we articulate in the Just Transition Framework.
Thanks, Deepak. I'm going to allow Crispian to also make an intervention. And Crispian, while you're making your intervention, just understanding of today's meeting, maybe if we can clarify that. And then on maybe just a commitment to have a more concrete, substantive follow-up consultation, an opportunity to open up for written submissions, as well as the opportunity for there to be more physical engagements to accommodate those that are not necessarily a part of today's meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Chair. So I'm partly covered by what Deepak said, but maybe just to reiterate, we had some logistical challenges hosting hybrid meetings at NEDLAC, and we had to, at the last minute, try and change venue, because every time there was load shedding, the NEDLAC line dropped, and it was an appalling experience. So my apologies that today's meeting is an online meeting. It's not how we want to conduct consultations. And as Steve has already committed to, and you've picked up this point, we will commit to a further in-person engagement so that we can deepen and pursue these discussions further. On the question of documents, I mean, the document we're discussing is the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. That was released by the presidency in November last year. So the document's been out there for some time. What the president committed to at the time of releasing the document was that it was a draft. It was being put out for consultation, and that there would be that us as the Climate Commission would organize a series of engagements with stakeholders around this document. So that's what today's meeting is attempting to do, is to fulfill that undertaking that was made to consult. What we intend to do as the Secretariat and as the Commission is, having engaged stakeholders in one or more meetings, to consolidate those comments and to make recommendations back to government. So, we intend to put in front of government what every stakeholder has said and how the plan should be amended to take account of those views. So that's, that was the purpose of these consultations, is to make specific and direct recommendations back to government to say, this is how the plan should be amended. And I take it, the plan is imperfect. I think there are many ways it can be improved. There have been some really excellent points already made by unions in various consultations around how the plan could be improved, and we were hoping this meeting would deepen those consultations further. On the issue of late notice and documents, I was informed by the Secretariat that they'd sent out the notices for this meeting 2 weeks ago, and that they sent out the documents for this meeting on Thursday last week. To the extent that that didn't happen, I must apologize upfront. I will investigate why that didn't happen. But, you know, I'd been given different information by the Secretariat to say, you know, we convened this on proper notice and we did send the documents out. It's certainly not the way that we want to work. But just to note, Chair, the document under discussion was released some months ago. You know, it was released in November already. So what was circulated on Thursday was simply the presentation, which summarizes the contents of the document. So it's not as if comrades that got the presentation late wouldn't have had a chance to study the full document. All we're doing in the presentation is giving you a synopsis of the issues. And I would urge that we continue, we hear the presentations, we take some preliminary feedback, and then we convene a proper in-person meeting at a later date to go further and deeper into some of the issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretariat. Comrade Rift and Comrade Sydney, I'm going to ask for the following. I'm going to ask that we allow the presentation on the JET IP with the understanding that we are going to listen to today's presentation. And in terms of the facilitated plenary discussion, I will then take your hands first, and then we have a preliminary discussion. We're changing the status of today's meeting. This is an initial feedback session, if that's what we must call this. The investment plan, we are engaging on a draft. The Secretariat has already explained that. I'm going to request that we get into the presentation, colleagues. I'm going to appeal that we get into the presentation, and then we will take you, Comrade Rifter and Comrade Sydney, right after the facilitated plenary discussion, or in the facilitated plenary discussion, as the first two hands that we will raise. Let's listen to the presentation, and then as part of the facilitated discussion, we will then fully fledge out these issues, because they are all in reference to the JET IP, comrades. With that said, and I'm pleading that we get into the JET IP discussion. I request that, Deepak, I believe you are then introducing the speaker who will be taking us through the investment plan.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I've covered some of it already. As colleagues will know, that arising out of COP26 came an offer from a group of sovereign donor countries, as well as a part of the World Bank by way of the Climate Investment Fund, to offer $8.5 billion as part of the international community's contribution to an energy transition in South Africa. Upon that offer being made, a political agreement was entered into between the presidency and what we now know to be the International Partner Group, which set the stage then for the appointment of the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team, headed up formally by Daniel Manele. That task team was charged with the job of developing, based on our socioeconomic realities and what our objectives would be, as well as what the climate objectives are that are contained in our nationally determined contributions. And together with the IPG, a secretariat was formed. That secretariat led the process under the leadership of Joanne Yawich to formulate the JET investment plan, which was then tabled through the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team to the IMC and then to Cabinet. It is in that context that we need to indicate that the JET investment plan is much larger than, broader than, and much more all-encompassing than the $8.5 billion. Of course, we must look at the composition makeup of the $8.5 billion. However, as the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team, we would appeal when stakeholders and colleagues consider the JET IP, that be done also in the context that it indicates a quantum of closer to $98 billion that would be required for various elements that make up the just energy transition, and that together with stakeholders, we need to look at whether that jet IP firstly is appropriate for our conditions, but secondly, how together in partnership, we close that gap that is almost $90 billion as we undertake what is regarded as a very fundamental transition, defined, of course, and framed within our notion of the just transition. And so with that introduction, I want to hand over to Joanne Yawich, who is the head of the Secretariat for the JET-P. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues and comrades. Can I get the presentation up on the screen, please? And then I will venture into it. Maybe I've heard everything that has been said, so I'm going to treat this as an opportunity to go through the content of to take you through the content of the JET-IP in a summarized point as an initial part of a longer and better structured consultation process. So that's my understanding. I think just before I get into the actual presentation, just on documentation, so you know, in addition to what the Secretariat will send out, the JET-IP, as was said, is on the Presidency website. In addition, this presentation is also on the Presidency website. It has been there since the end of November last year, and it is there as a summary of the JET-IP. And just for those of you who are going to go through the JET-IP in depth and in detail, there are three parts to that document. The first is an executive summary, which is around a 12-page document. The actual investment plan is then about another 80 or 90 pages. And then there are another 100 pages of annexures, which explain what the work was that was done in order to put together the investment plan. So those are the kind of bundle of documents, but this presentation is also on the Presidency website, and I thought I should explain that as well. It's in PDF format, it's not in presentation form. Okay, so as was said by the Secretariat, I ran the Secretariat of the PCC. I ran the Secretariat that did the technical work that went into putting this investment plan together, that then went to the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team and to the Interministerial Committee that was overseeing the work, and from there to Cabinet. So maybe just to talk about some of the starting points and the underpinnings of this document. Firstly, a recognition of the serious climate risks that we face as a country. I mean, we are now sitting for kind of the second time in a very short period with devastating floods in parts of the country. And the physical impacts of climate change are starting to be felt in ways that have fundamentally negative impacts on the lives of South Africans. Our economy is a highly carbon-intensive economy, probably the most carbon-intensive economy in the world, and the risks that we face of not managing a low carbon transition in an orderly and planned way that supports affected workers, communities, and industries are high over the next, over probably around the next 20 or 30 years. So we're in the early stages of the move from a high carbon economy to one that is hopefully net zero by 2050. We want an energy transition in this country that is really well managed, well researched, and structured to that in such a way that it addresses our challenges of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and economic exclusion. And so what you want from an energy transition is to end up in a situation that is better for the majority of our people than where we sit at the moment. It's a whole of society of transition and involves all sectors of society. And the PCC has a specific role, and I think both Dr. Olver and Deepak Patel have explained that, as well as the chair, that the PCC and its Just Transition Framework has created the basis for social partners to align around the energy transition in such a way that all the different social partners can make sure that their voices are heard. So South Africa in 2021 submitted an updated nationally determined contribution to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in so doing, in submitting an ambitious commitment on the part of a country, the question really there is around how our climate action could be supported by the international community in such a way that the international community meets its obligations in terms of the Paris Agreement. And both the Convention and the Paris Agreement make it very, very clear that climate action by developing countries must be supported through the provision of finance, technology, and capacity building by the international community to the developing world so that we can take climate action. And in doing this plan, we took that as the bottom line framework and looked at the scale of need on the one hand and the financing options between 2023 and 2027 to decarbonize the economy at the rate that would be required to meet the NDC targets. So 2023, maybe just to explain the time frame, the political agreement that was signed in Glasgow talks about a 3 to 5 year rolling set of commitments, financial commitments, and the initial period really is the 2023 to 2027 period. And in the context of the $8.5 billion over that initial period, we thought that what we should do is to use that as kind of looking at what could we do in the first 5 year period in order to build a pathway to a low carbon and climate resilient society. On the left-hand side, the slide on the left-hand side shows the NDC range. So we as a country said, we commit as a country to achieving a level of carbon reductions that would take us to between 420 megatons of carbon equivalent at the top to a range of 350 to between 420 and 350 megatons of carbon equivalent. Reaching 420 is something that we can probably do as a country with our own resources, but to get to 350, we are going to need significant support and investments. And so what we then did is to say, if we were going to get to the lowest bottom end of the NDC, what would we need? And in the investment plan, it set out in great detail that essentially what we would probably require is 1.5 trillion rand over the 5 year period from many sources, developed countries, private sector investors, development finance institutions, from governments, from philanthropic organizations and grant makers, and from multilateral development banks. And in terms of that Glasgow agreement, 3 key sectors were identified: electricity, the electricity sector, new energy vehicles, so electric vehicles primarily, and the green hydrogen economy. And then in doing this work, what we did was to identify 2 areas that were critical in terms of enabling a just energy transition to happen. And that is firstly around the skills, how we're going to, as a country, develop the skills base to be able to ensure that we have the human capacity for that. And then what we need to do is also address the challenges that we have in terms of the capacity of our municipalities to provide power in a way that is clean and through a modernized and efficient and effective grid. Next slide. Okay, so bearing in mind, on the one hand, the Just Transition Framework and then the NDP and the NDP's 2030 aspirations and targets, we see this, this investment plan framed in the context of a just energy transition that firstly protects vulnerable workers and communities, that builds energy security so that, in other words, we leverage this program in order to support some of the means that are necessary in order to address the current energy security crisis in a way that expands energy access and addresses the issues of energy poverty, that promotes industrial development, in particular localization of new value chains, that drives innovation, that can develop sustainable livelihoods for people who are affected by the just energy transition, that enables economic diversification and spurs inclusive economic growth. And in the plan, we've tried to address all of those elements, and we will go through them as we move. Okay. So if we look at those priority sectors, and I'm going to, in the way that I present, give you some of the feedback that we've already received. So the bulk of the funds that we are looking at, 711 billion rands, are invested, we are proposing gets invested in the electricity sector. And I'll go in detail just now into what needs to be spent in the electricity sector. Then 128 billion into the new energy vehicle sector, 319 billion into green hydrogen, 2.7 billion into skills development. And there's already been, I think, quite a strong view from a number of stakeholders that this is inadequate, and we can talk about that later, that in actual fact, if it's such a critical element, you need much more resources to go into it. And then 319 billion into municipal capacity, which includes the work of being able to fix the municipal grids. Next slide. Okay, this slide I'm going to really contextualizes the just energy transition and looks at the challenges that we need to address in terms of dealing with it and seeing the investment plan as a contribution to a better life for all. So we note the high levels of poverty in our country, the untenable levels of unemployment, and particularly youth unemployment, the fact that we have the highest Gini coefficient in the world, we're the most unequal country in the world, we are the most carbon-intensive economy in the world, we are faced with low and declining economic growth, not only kind of as a result of COVID, but there's a long-term trend. We are dealing with a serious electricity supply crisis. We are vulnerable to physical climate risk and also vulnerable to transition risk. And really, the commodities that we export as a country, because they are produced using carbon-intensive production methods and electricity that is coal-fueled, have a high degree of carbon embedded in them. And our trading partners in various parts of the world are starting to put in place sets of barriers and penalizing high carbon intensive exports. And it poses a huge risk for us as a country that we need to deal with going forward so that we don't lose even more jobs and even more businesses. Next slide. I'm going to take most of the slide as read, but I think it is important to say that in putting this investment plan together, what we first did was to look at the suite of policies that we currently have in the country around energy and climate, and that is what is listed on the slide. Some of the most recent announcements around electricity are not included. Anything from the end of November last year is not included, but the slide can be updated. But I think most importantly, in writing this investment plan, we agreed to stick within the existing policy framework. So there is very little in this investment plan that says in order to implement it, we need to change policy fundamentally. In some of the feedback that we've received, I think there are areas in the investment plan where we know that further work needs to be done. Let me take one example. We've created a kind of placeholder to say that we think it would be important to build systems where we could roll out social ownership of renewables, ownership by workers, ownership by communities, look at cooperatives and the potential for new forms of ownership to be able to have a stake in this new energy economy. We have not gone into that in detail, but in the implementation phase, I think some of those issues, and I'll go through them in the presentation, are going to require further work. And I think that it's going to be very important that we work collaboratively and collectively around those areas. The issue of whether the free basic allocation for electricity is sufficient or structured well enough is another area. And there are a number of those where I think there's quite a lot of further work to be done. But we did stick within the framework of the 2019 IRP, the existing climate policy, the existing state of the DTIC's roadmap in relation to new energy vehicles. Next slide. Okay, so maybe to go in a little bit of detail into the priorities, and starting with the electricity sector. These are the allocations: 4.1 billion for coal plant decommissioning. That is in alignment with the IRP decommissioning schedule in relation to coal plants that have reached the end of life. Then 100, the bulk of the resources go into renewables, so into new solar and new wind, both in terms of Eskom being able to invest in new infrastructure, as well as a much wider set of society being able to also build renewables. Then a big allocation to transmission, 131.8 billion. You will know that in the Northern and the Eastern Cape, which is where our best solar and wind resources in the country are, at the moment, the grid has reached capacity, and so we can't build anymore. So there is a provision to allow us to expand the grid so that we can maximize that resource in a much better way than we do at the moment, but also a provision for modernizing the grid. For example, I'm sure you've read a lot about the fact that there is the possibility of people of investing in rooftop solar and then being able to feed back into the grid. That requires a grid that can actually achieve and do that. So there's a modernization of the grid. That total comes to 647 billion rand. Next slide. Okay. Now, initially, when I spoke about the electricity sector, you'll have noticed that the amount was 701 billion rand. And that is because at this point in time, for the next 5 years, we put together an allocation of 60 billion rand specifically for the just transition investment needs in Mpumalanga, in relation again to the coal plant. That in terms of the IRP 2019 is going to start to wind down slowly over the next 20 or 30 years, but it does start fairly soon. So there's 3.4 billion for repurposing coal plants, 13 billion allocated for repurposing coal mining land, and that is for rehabilitation and for being able to turn that land that can't be used at the moment into a resource that communities can access in order to be able to generate a set of new economic activities in areas that at the moment are effectively sterilized. We put an amount of 12.3 billion in for improving infrastructure for development. One example, for example, is in the Mpumalanga municipalities where much of our coal plant is. The transportation of coal has led to quite serious damage to the road infrastructure, and it would be important that we repair damaged and degraded infrastructure in those municipalities in order to open the way for diversifying local economies, and building new enterprises and opening up those areas to new opportunities. So we've put in an amount of 24 billion rand for diversifying local economies. That would be for a very wide set of economic activities, including the development of SMEs, the ability for new entrants into the renewables value chain, for setting up new factories, for starting to produce new goods, for starting to be able to really build a long-term new energy economy that is as localized as possible in our country. And that obviously has a significant spin-off in terms of our ability to then create jobs and skills and options for the future for a wide range of people in those areas, some who are currently in the coal value chain, but also for young people. Caring for the coal workforce, we are concerned that we are not clear how, there's a risk at the moment that if we do not plan to support people, that there is a risk that as the economies in these areas start to change, that people currently in the coal workforce, maybe workers who are nearing retirement. We know that many of the workers in the coal value chain, as they reach retirement, are not very well, they're not very healthy. What we wanted to do was to put in place a provision so that we can support and put in place the schemes that would make sure that those people aren't left stranded without jobs and without money, and that will have to be programmed. There's then 750 million for investing in youth and preparing future generations for the transition. This is separate to the skills allocation, which is separate, but needs to be added to it. We obviously need to have a well-planned transition. We as a country do not want a chaotic situation where all of a sudden we're closing down economic infrastructure willy-nilly. We need to accept that as you ramp down one set of economic activities, another set of economic activities are simultaneously being built. So to do that properly, you've got to plan for it. You need policy frameworks to maybe change, particularly in relation to post-mining redevelopment and exploiting new economic opportunities. And then we've got to build capacity, including of municipalities and a wide range of civil society and labor stakeholders, in order that people can participate in this process effectively. Again, I know that there has been criticism that 60 billion is not adequate. I think we need to, as we go along, work collaboratively around the detail and how this is going to be programmed. And I think that if it is inadequate, then we need to go out and we need to, in a very focused way, raise additional thing. And maybe what I should have said in the beginning, this is the ask. This is saying, if we are going to do everything that we want to, this is the scale of the resources and the finance that we would need. Next slide. Okay, just to finish on what we were doing before, we've put an additional allocation of 1.6 billion for particularly for looking at how we stimulate manufacturing and localizing the clean energy value chain, in addition to the previous allocation. And then I spoke earlier on about social ownership models, and we put in an allocation of 1.65 billion for putting together a set of pilots and a set of activities that could help us to develop and to open up and to spread access to this clean energy economy to a much wider set of participants from a much wider set of places in society, including people who at this point in time are excluded from it. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to go through, I'm worried about time, I'm going to go through the municipal slide quite fast. I've spoken about the fact that, and I'm sure we all know, that our infrastructure and our distribution network across the country is in a disastrous state. We read on a daily basis about substations exploding. We live with the problem At the moment, our assessment is that you're looking at around 200 billion to fix the municipal infrastructure network, another 73 billion to look at modernizing it, not only for renewables, but also for renewables, but also to allow electric vehicles as they come on stream to be powered through the grid. We need to deal with the electrification backlog in various ways. So that is really the provision of connecting people who are currently not connected to the distribution grid to the grid. We've provided an amount, as a relatively small amount for demand side management, which is really around energy efficiency. Some, again, work around planning for new schemes that are going to allow a much broader set of people across society to have access to energy, including to be able to generate and produce their own energy and hopefully sell it back into the grid. We need to build the capacity and capability of municipalities to manage this properly. We need to do collective planning across municipalities because this grid is interconnected. And then there's work that needs to be done around the way municipal finances work in order to be able to look at whether they need to be restructured in order to support this. Next one. Okay, in terms of the new energy vehicle sector's investment needs, the first is really around industrial development and innovation. So looking at what it's going to take for the industry to retrofit itself. You will, I'm sure in this audience, I'm sure there are many people who are involved in the automotive value chain. We know that by around 2030, 2035, many of the markets where we sell 60% of the cars that we produce in this country are being sold in markets where there's a legal requirement to shift to electric vehicles by around 2035. And if we don't make the shift, we really risk losing a very large part of what is a critical employer and a critical value chain in the country that goes right from the production plants in the Eastern Cape and elsewhere through to the people who work in our petrol stations. And so we've got to be very proactive in being able to firstly do the retrofitting, secondly, being able to, I think, have a very strong focus on public transport so that when we roll out electric vehicles in South Africa, it isn't something that we're only doing with the rich, for the rich who can afford a single person vehicle, but we're actually looking at how do we retrofit or build our new bus fleets, two-wheelers and three-wheelers in such a way that you're spreading access to cheap and affordable public transport to a much larger number of people. We need to look at how we reduce our emissions in the transport sector. We need to support early adoption and innovation. And I think one of the interesting things about the work that was done is that there are many quite small entrepreneurs and manufacturers who are really wanting and have invested in building this value chain, including the fact that you can actually get now, at this point in time, you can actually drive from Johannesburg to Cape Town in an electric vehicle and be able to charge it all the way along the line because people are investing in that network. And then 70.4 billion, that is in line with the DTIC's roadmap that really looks at how finance is deployed in order to support the shift. Next slide. When we come on to green hydrogen, we're looking at an entirely new economic sector that probably is one of the key sources of power for industrial economies into the future. And South Africa has significant competitive advantage in relation to starting to develop this economy and produce. And on the left hand side, it's aviation fuel, e-methanol, fuel cells, green hydrogen and green ammonia, powering green steel, looking at the potential of hydrogen for mobility, and then the infrastructure for it. And the hydrogen thing is divided. Hydrogen allocations that we think we need as a country are divided into three elements. The first is project feasibility costs. There are a number of entrepreneurs and investors in the country who are starting to develop hydrogen projects. We've allocated 4.51 billion rand to support their endeavors. Then there are the capital costs for the above projects. In other words, building the plants that will be allowing those to happen. That's 163.5 billion rand. And then there's an amount of 151 billion that is set aside for the potential port project developments that would allow us to be exporting hydrogen. And a critical element of the hydrogen strategy is not only that we produce for domestic consumption, but that we use our country's exceptional solar and wind resources in order to produce hydrogen that we can then export and benefit on the export markets across the world where people can't produce hydrogen themselves, green hydrogen. So that's 319 billion. Next slide. And I'm conscious that I am running out of time, so I'm going to try and finish this in the next 5 minutes. 2.65, as I said, for skills that I think there's everybody has criticized this allocation. Firstly, we need to have a coordinated strategy as a country. So there's a finance allocated in order to be able to do that. The finance has been allocated for skills development, in particular pilot projects, Mpumalanga, where the coal workforce is affected, the Eastern Cape, where the automotive industry is affected, the Northern Cape, which would likely be the base of the green hydrogen economy. And then we need to also do the work of ensuring that in the coordination, we mobilize the allocations from existing public and private post-school education and training institutions and government budgets in order that you are mobilizing those and leveraging those. I'm trying to also look at some of the comments on the chat. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Importantly, in doing the work around this, the PCFTT set out a set of principles that are important in terms of the quality of finance that South Africa would want, and I suppose our finance bottom lines. Firstly, and I've spoken about the UNFCCC principles for developed countries to support developing countries. We've said that the finance should be additional to existing climate and development commitments, that the instruments should reflect our unique needs as a country, so they should work for us. We've said that financing of the just transition component should be mainstreamed. I think really critical that it isn't seen as some kind of little side add-on, but it's absolutely central to the plan. Then sovereign debt terms should be more attractive than could be secured in the capital markets, and National Treasury has assessed the finance and offer in the 8.5 billion to make sure that that is the case, and that the interest rates where there are loans is more attractive than what can be secured in the capital markets, that the financing flow should be predictable and certain, that finance should go through the institutions that are best placed to manage it, that partnerships with the private sector should foster appropriate risk sharing. You don't want government to take all the risk or the private sector to take all the risk. It's got to be a balanced system, and that obviously the issues around governance and the safeguards to ensure that this money is not looted and plundered must be put in place. Okay. And what we are really looking at in this is also for, I think, public finance and grant finance to leverage finance from the private sector and from institutional investors, including pension funds. So we're looking at a finance gap of around 700 billion rand over the 5-year period. It's around 44%. It's not 98 billion. It's not $98 billion. The reason is that work was done to look at what the private sector is already planning to invest. The banks, the pension funds and others are allocating in terms of investment in these sectors over the next 5 years, and we reckon it's around, potentially, there's the potential for the private sector to invest, including in building new factories and things like that, to invest around 500 billion, and then we would need to develop a finance mobilization strategy for the rest, and that is a critical part of the implementation phase of this work. Okay. All right, I think let's, in the interest of time, let's skip this slide and go on to the 8.5 billion. So I think we made it clear, and Deepak made it clear in his introduction, that the 8.5 billion is a start, that what we actually need as a country is around 1.5 trillion rand, around $98 billion. This sets out what the 8.5 billion is. As you can see, the grant component, and I think this is something that Labour's already made its views together with a wide range of others, that, and the president, I think, has voiced very vocally the fact that we are very concerned as a country that in that 8.5 billion, only 329.7 billion is grant finance. 5.3 billion of the finance is concessional loans. Then sorry people, this is in US, in millions of US dollars. Then in commercial loans, there is from the United Kingdom and the United States. The allocations, there are allocations that will go to the private sector, including to some of the, hopefully, new enterprises and new investors and SMEs in this value chain. But that is a commercial loan part of the package. And then there is 1.3 billion that the United Kingdom is a guarantee that is being provided to the African Development Bank for lending and investment in South Africa in such a way that that 1.3 billion gets significantly leveraged in order that South Africa can attract and utilize that money on attractive terms. So that is what that guarantee is. And that then gives you a total of close on $8.5 billion. One of the things that has been done in the last 3 or 4 months, because of the concern around the limited degree of grants, is that a number of these countries are now coming forward and adding additional grant finance into this package. So this package is not a fixed and final package. It is a package to still be negotiated. And I think there's a lot of work to be done around that. So that, for example, when Chancellor Schulz was here last year, Germany added additional grant finance to that, to their allocation. When Secretary Yellen was here, the United States added another $45 million onto the grant element of the package that they are putting forward, and some of these other countries are doing the same. I should also say that we have been in a kind of chicken and egg situation where there have been a whole set of countries, both countries and investors, who have sat watching this process and said, we are really keen to invest in South Africa, but we want to know what you need. And we've said, well, we're doing the investment plan and we want to know what you're going to contribute. And so there's been this kind of conversation now. And so countries like Denmark, Spain, the Netherlands, and a range of others are now looking at the plan and saying, well, here's where we think we could invest. So I see on the chat, people are saying, where are we going to find some of that money? I think that we have to go out and mobilize. We have to go out and raise the finance. And we have to have a very deliberate strategy that focuses on public sector sources, private sector sources, and also looks at what we can mobilize from philanthropy and grant makers, particularly for those just transition elements of the package. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the IPG funds at the moment are really focused on decommissioning of coal plants, expansion and strengthening of the transmission grid and distribution infrastructure, supporting economic diversification and the just transition elements in affected coal mining areas, and deployment of renewable energy. Next one. Yeah, so the initial, this just kind of basically sets that out in a graph. It really is focused on infrastructure and using that to catalyze development. Next slide. So I think talking about implementing the JET IP, which is really where we are at the moment, and looking towards, I think, a much more collaborative and participative process of implementation than there may have been in the development of the plan. We want to lay the foundations for a sustained, focused and visible effort across government, civil society, trade unions and the private sector that can allow us to work together and to ensure that our respective needs and the needs of our constituencies are really met in ways that make for a new and better future. And we want to ground it in existing South African institutions and system and adopt to both local and global best practice. Next one. So going forward, firstly, we will continue to have ministerial oversight, governance and political coordination, as well as national government oversight and coordination of the countrywide JET IP. That will also update national plans, mobilizing ongoing finance, including finance from the fiscus, and monitor and report national results. Then obviously there are going to be institution-specific funding agreements between the providers of finance and implementing institutions. So if Eskom receives finance from one of the IPG members, there will also be a contract between Eskom and them. The National Treasury will manage sovereign loan agreements with the providers of finance, and some of this money does come in the form of sovereign loans. There are national intermediary institutions. So, for example, our own DFIs, the DBSA and the IDC, who will manage disbursements of capital to municipalities, to private companies, to NGOs. So I think that that is important, that we need to build our national institutions in order to be able to manage and implement the program. We're looking to how we could build strong community level governance and trade union structures for ongoing needs identification, involvement in the program, visibility of projects, supporting the monitoring and learning, and also social partner organizations playing intermediary roles in social support investments. And I think this is a critical conversation when we have the proper consultation. I think the question of what role can the unions play in ensuring that this program is one that really meets the needs of workers is going to be a critical, and what needs to happen to achieve that is a critical conversation. And then we also want to attract private sector investors and also ensure that they contribute and they report on what they're doing in order that there is also transparency on those investments. I think I'm going to stop here and hand back to you, Chair. As I said, this presentation is on the presidency website, and it has now, as I understand it, being distributed to the participants on the call. So I'm hoping that this explanation will allow for a substantive conversation when we go into the actual consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you very much to Deepak as well. Colleagues, I'm going to open up for questions, comments, as well as initial reflections at this point. There were a number of comments that were raised in the chat. I'm just going to request the people that sponsored those comments to also maybe make their inputs in this session, so that we can have those initial discussions and engagements. Before I hand over to Gideon, Deepak, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I've also been perusing the comments in the chat. And there was one comment asking how concessional are these loans?
Can I request, sorry, Deepak, I'm so sorry to do this. We're going to respond to all of those, and maybe let's get the input first. And sorry, Gideon, I did commit that I would allow for Comrade Rifta to go first and Comrade Sydney to go second, because before we had opened up the discussion, we did request that the presentation be made and their hands were still up. So I'm going to start with Comrade Rifta. After that, Comrade Sydney, you'll make your point. Gideon, you'll come afterwards, and then we'll hand over to Wandisile, and then I'll be noting the other hands. Comrade Gia Fedusa.
Greetings, Madam Chair, the esteemed commissioners on the platform, honourable members of Organised Labour, good afternoon once again. Comrade Chair, we are always principled and grounded in mandating and process. So we follow procedure, and I just wanted, by virtue of raising my hand before the presentation started, wanted to second the recommendation that was made by Deepak as well as Dr. Crispian, that we allow for the presentations so that we are then able to proceed with the conversation, albeit the mitigating factors that were presented, so that we don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, but allow for this first round of discussion to unfold and then have deeper conversations with supporting evidence in terms of the transition that as Organised Labour we want to be absolutely just in every way. So, Madam Chair, I just wanted to second that move from the onset, as such, not necessarily overriding the powers and privilege that you hold as the chairperson, but just wanting to support that. So I'll hold on to the questions that I do have in terms of the order that you will note. Thank you, Chair. I hand back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Comrade Rifta. Comrade Sydney?
No, thank you. Just one question, because this is a plan, not a draft plan. What is the status of the funding that has been pledged in terms of the loans, whether concessional or commercial? Have we signed anything as we speak, or just merely pledges? And I also want to understand, because I thought you'll also give us an indication of a repayment plan of these loans. If the sovereignty is going to bear, including on behalf of the private sector, I wonder what is the opinion of the Treasury in relation to its public debt targets that it delivered in Parliament. But just to clarify, what is the status now? Are these just pledges, or have we signed anything since Egypt? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Gideon, I had noted you to come after Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. And also thank you, Joanne, also for the presentation. First of all, just a comment regarding funding. A big portion of that is already supposed to be funded in terms of current mining legislation. So as far as coal miners go, in order to apply and retain a mining license, you have to comply or submit a social and labor plan, and you have to comply with a mining charter. And that already includes elements around employment or the promotion of employment of all affected people, social and economic welfare, human resource development. So that's already in there. So basically, currently you have those forums, and whenever workers or communities are affected, be that through mined out areas or be that through Industry 4.0, you automatically go into those processes where a lot of the elements that you've addressed here from a mining company point of view needs to be attended to in order to, in terms of your mining license. And now if we add the just transition or the move to low carbon economy, automatically that's already been regulated and legislated. So quite a bit of that processes will be funded already by mining companies. And so in other words, it's already in place. And then obviously if you go through a 189 process, there's also portable skills that comes into play. That's already part of some collective agreement. So vulnerable workers, communities, mine workers in the coal mining space has already been more or less, being dealt with to a degree. But then the one area that I felt is that we need to look at funding as well, and it's a very sensitive area. If you look at the Highveld, Mpumalanga Highveld area, the pollution is so high. So now it's, do you save jobs or do you save lives? A report that came out yesterday says that by the end of the decommissioning of the mines in that specific area, 79,000 people will die as a result of the pollution. So do you now fast track those areas? Because remember, a lot of people attract asthma as well. But there's no funding in this model around medical services, or, if we come to prioritizing, that's a debate for another time. But yeah, just in the second part is funding, for medical services or people affected by polluted areas where the just transition is not taking place speedily. But then later on, maybe another debate is to share, a lot of things around the social and labor plans that we can learn. But as I said, that's for another debate and a topic. Thank you. Thank you, Lebogang.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Just for when we make our inputs, just to introduce ourselves and indicate where we're from. Gideon, you're from Solidarity Center. You're from Solidarity.
Apology, yes, sorry, I'm Gideon du Plessis, the General Secretary of Solidarity, yes.
Thank you, Julius. And Rifta is the General Secretary of EDUSA. Sydney Khara, you are from NEHAW. Wandisile, I'll take your hand next.
Thanks, Chairperson. Wandisile Bram, Acting Sector Coordinator from NUMSA. Chairperson, firstly, we need to firmly state that as part of our agreement, as much as we want to really engage the presentation, but we are of the understanding that this is not a consultation. However, we've got clarity-seeking questions from our side. One, it appears quite clearly that as South Africans, we are in a hurry to borrow this money. We don't have this money. Basically, we want to invest so much and moving away from, high intensive, economy in terms of the pollution to a low carbon and climate resilient economy. But it appears the speed to which we're moving at, it's more aligned to developed countries, not taking into account that we are a developing country. Now, this brings me now to the Paris Agreement, Article number 4, where it states that developing countries are encouraged to move over time, in wide economy, low emission, a sort of arrangement. Now, but what we're witnessing here is that there is this space we want to, to appear like what developed countries, while in fact, the protocol is clear that we are encouraged to move over time in light of our national circumstances. Now, what is our national circumstances? We know that the national treasurer, does not have money to an extent that we are borrowing. We want to borrow basically 1 trillion as we have witnessed there. Now, the question is, under the current arrangement, this money can only be paid back by the consumers. Because basically, if you say you want to attract private, sector investment into the renewable energy sector. It is going to go through the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, which will eventually lead to higher tariffs. It will be expensive for us, to do business. So the question is, are we in a position, to move at this pace? Because clearly the decision is that the power stations must be closed down and that the route should be renewables. Now the question is, can we afford this route? That's number one. Two, as much as there is a talk of creating jobs, with the investment in particular in the electricity sector, in particular wind and solar PVs, this is around 475 billion. Now, the renewable energy policy of 2003 stated that the jobs to be created should be centered around establishing a manufacturing sector for the renewables. Currently, as we speak, we don't have a company that manufactures wind turbines. We don't have a company that is manufacturing solar PVs at the scale that it can meet the demand of the upcoming bid windows in the renewable energy programs. So basically, what will happen is that the private sector is going to put money in order to roll out these projects. Obviously, in trying to meet, their timelines, they are going to buy, the wind turbines, the solar PVs, and all the associated equipment from the international market, because we don't have the industry as we speak. So how are we going to create jobs if there is going to be tensions now between the interest of the private sector and the government? Because government on one side, they want to create jobs, but the private sector on one side, once they are allocated a project, they are tight, time frames for them to build the renewable energy project. And as such, they will sideline the national priorities. So how do we balance the two then if we're going to move, in this direction? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for those comments, 26. Comrade Tiango?
Hi, Lebu, can you hear me?
Who is that?
Hello. Look, it's Zolani who's speaking. Actually connected by sharing the link from Tango.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Please introduce yourself and indicate which union you're from.
Okay. My name is Zolani Masule. The Regional Deputy Secretary of NEHAO in Tshwane. Can you hear me still?
Yes, I can hear you. Please proceed.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So your internet connection is not so good. Can I ask you to maybe try and move around, maybe look at having an alternative source quickly? I'll come back to you, Zola. Let me take somebody else while you sort out your internet. All right. Let's.
I just want to from the presenter is.
Zolani?
Can you hear me now?
Just try and speak again. Let's test.
Can
Zolani?
you hear me now?
No, it's still not good. Let me hand over to somebody else, and then while you're still trying to sort it out, we'll come back to you. I'm definitely.
Can you hear me now?
Not so good. That's why I'm saying try and move around. Let's take somebody else, and then we'll come back to you. Can I then move over to Slindo Gushe? Slindo Gushe?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. NUM. Chair, just two clarity-seeking questions. The first one will relate to
there is a slide where, I think it's slide number 29, where, or 50 and above. Okay, to me it's say 29. The 700 billion shortfall. Sorry, I think is it 700 million or 700? I assume it's 700 billion or million shortfall. Now, what I want to understand is, no, it's 700 billion, yes, in rand currency. What I want to understand is, now if you're saying we've got a shortfall as per the presentation, an assumption will therefore on my end says that means the greater portion of the 60 something plus percent, as this 700 billion constitute 44% of the total 1.48 billion. What I want to understand, trillion, I mean, what I want to understand is that 60% plus of that 1.4 trillion already secured. If at this point our conclusion is such that we have reduced it in the form of a presentation to say, is there 64, is it 66%? Is it already secured, or 54%, 56%, my apologies, 56%, is it secured? And secured in under which financial vehicle, instruments? Because I'm a bit I was a bit caught by that shortfall already. Now the next one will be when Germany had a problem. Germany have advanced in terms of jet. When they were hit by the Ukraine-Russia war, the legislature was in a position to actually sanction for emergency return of their mothball coal power stations. And as a result, they never found themselves in a dire state of energy poverty. And while evidently in their jet, they were careful that their jet is just such that it does preserve energy security in the process. Now, my concern when I look at the jet IP, it focuses more on decommissioning, and which raises a concern on my end to say, if we were to be hit by the similar catastrophe that Europe and Germany was faced with when they couldn't get gas from Russia, what is going to happen? Because our jet seems to be prone into and towards decommissioning, but there is less investment and interest towards mothballing certain power stations in the interest of justness, so that we are in the end guaranteed of energy security. Because one thing we cannot run away from is the reliability in terms of base load that the coal power station provide. But obviously, I do not see investment towards investing towards cleaner coal, even for purposes of mothballing, all in the name of ensuring energy security and not landing ourselves as we transition in energy poverty, because times that we live in are not guaranteed. Any unprecedented catastrophe can strike us, but will you be in a position like Germany, where we're able to return 27 of their power stations, which were mothballed, yet throughout, before that, the advent of that period, throughout they were using the renewables and cleaner energy, but they were not so oblivious of the fact and of the eventuality that in the end, justness should, at the end of the day, ensure that there's energy security by not, focusing mainly in decommissioning, but inter alia have an interest towards investing in mothballing, however, of coal power station in a state that, however, they will be cleaner as far as possible. So investment towards cleaner coal, in my view, should be considered for purposes of mothballing, all in the name of energy security in an event we face the similar catastrophe, your Ukraine-Russia war, which Germany couldn't run away from. but they were saved by how they managed that jet transition, which was not prone entirely towards decommissioning, but it had mothballing feature in part of the scheme. So those were two comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Silindo. Zolani, I'm going to try to hand back to you again. Just want to see if you were able to sort out your connectivity issues, and then after that, I want to hand over to the GS of the NUM, and then we'll go down the list again.
All right.
Zolani?
Can you hear me now, Leo?
Perfectly.
Okay. No, thank you very much for that, and my apologies for the earlier connectivity challenges. My first concern is the plan seems to make an assumption, which I don't know what's the basis of that, that when you talk of low carbon economy and the energy sources that are associated with it, it seems to be only focusing on renewable.
Zolani, you've muted yourself.
Can you hear now?
Can hear you.
Okay. So the plan seems to limit what it calls green energy to wind and solar, and to a greater extent also to hydrogen. But hydro is equally a green energy source. So is nuclear. So why there is no focus on other sources which are not as intermittent as what the plan seems to be focusing on, but also provide the base load which the country needs, and including what the latter speaker spoke about, investment in the research on clean coal. Because you see, the suggestion or the what is assumed that by adding more renewables, that will guarantee energy security. It's not backed by facts, because we all know that the efficiency or even the energy availability factor of those technologies is around 30%, for a simple reason that there is no wind all the time, and also there is no sun all the time. And even if you were to talk about battery storage, it has not developed to a point where you can be having or you can assume wind and solar to be base load, in a sense that what coal can give, what nuclear can give, and also what hydro can give. And is this plan therefore not being reckless by not including other base load, clean energy sources, as opposed to over-reliance only on intermittent sources of energy? And we suppose that should be our future. How are you going to do, and what's the basis of that? That's the first question. Then the second one is all of these investments, particularly in the electricity sector, it's gonna come out as loans, and those loans are loans that will be going to independent power producers. That is the reality of the energy trajectory in South Africa, because when you talk of renewables, you are talking of independent power producers. There is very little or no public involvement in that. So why then there is no focus on investment in renewable that speak to the involvement of the public? Because if we continue that way, then it means the energy generation in this country will be in the hands of the private sector, while all that we'll be doing is to close down the little capacity that Eskom has in terms of coal power stations. So what is the Just Energy Transition Plan saying about the need for the state, for the need for the public to play a role in terms of energy generation from clean sources of energy? And my last issue, which the latter speaker has spoke to, is around the imperative of energy security. Look, we are currently sitting on a devastating energy crisis. And that energy crisis, it is leading to massive economic destruction the destruction of jobs, the destruction of business, and all the socio-economic challenges that come with it. Yet at the same time, in the midst of this horror load shedding, we have a plan that talks about closing coal power stations and closing them in haste. So what can be just if you fail to balance between energy security and also our climate commitments? It is failing dismally to put as a priority the needs to make sure that South Africa has got a secure energy provision. You can't at the same time be talking about ending load shedding, but at the same time you are closing power stations. If this plan is to be just, we should be talking about prolonging these power stations, because there are no renewables that you can bring in on board right now that will make sure that we have load shedding. I mean, if you look at the IRP you were talking about, that IRP, you know, says that by at least 2030, you would have brought on board between solar, wind, and battery storage, approximately around 30,000 megawatts in terms of new generations, either from IPP or whoever. And the reality that comes out of that, you can only get an efficiency level of about 30% of that. So even if you put in 30,000 of solar, wind, and battery storage by 2030, it won't give you that as an output. So even by 2030, you will still need coal power station. You will still need other baseload sources of energy. So this plan, it's not realistic in a sense that it's going to plunge us in the dark. So we should be putting our energy security needs first. And that means we can't be talking about closing down our power station in haste unless we have established an enough alternative to what we are having. So we must secure first, and then once we have established, is then we can look at what extent have we established, and whatever we have established, will it be able to meet our energy security? But right now, it will not. And even by 2030, when it comes, you will still be having the same problems in terms of that. So we should rather be taking our own time. We can't be rushed. I mean, take China, for instance. China has developed a two-pronged strategy where they say by 2030, they are going to reach a peak efficiency in terms of, peak emissions. And they are going towards their net zero by 20. And that is the world's biggest polluter. And we are not, by the way. And that's not to say I'm belittling the impact of emissions towards climate change. But what is fundamentally flawed about this plan is the haste in which we are closing down a coal power station, the haste in which we don't want to hear any other word in terms of energy generation except wind and solar. And that is not sustainable. It doesn't matter what you present. If anything, it is still going to make sure that we still stay in dark, and that cannot be said is in the interest of South Africa. So you need to balance those ones. And that will take us back to the issue of the regulation. Your presenter says here that we're only looking in terms of the current framework. Why are you looking in terms of the current framework only when we meet, even if it means we must go back to the environmental targets to say we want to reach these targets, but the reality is that things are so dire to us that we cannot meet them as we would have wanted. So let us slow down here, slow down there. I am yet to be convinced that the trajectory you are taking, it will see to it that we still have got energy security by 2030 and post-2030. And as you close these power stations, what is the role of the state in the generation of electricity? The state is being pushed to the margins. All that we are talking about everywhere is independent power producers, independent producers. Where is the role of the state, particularly the imperative of the state in making sure that it provides universal access to electricity for the poor? The private sector is not interested in that. They are interested in profit making. So if it's only going to be the private sector going forward that will be playing into the energy generation of the future, what will be the role of the state? Are we taking a conscious decision that energy must only be in an exclusive reserve of the private sector and the state has got no role? Where is the role of the state in the energy of the future? It is nowhere to be found. And that cannot be said to be just, even in terms of jobs, even in terms of the local economies that's going to be killed. And, you know, you talk also in generic terms about jobs. Where are these jobs and how are these jobs? The current experience around the renewable industry, even solar and wind, is that it is not high labor intensive. So it's not possible that you could turn the entire workforce in a coal power station and convert them to be able to work in the, you know, in the renewable power plants. That's not possible. If you look at what is there and the number of jobs that are there, they are not comparable. So when we talk of just energy transition, it's just in terms of what? When we can see already that the pace in which we are moving, it's causing massive problems and it's going to cause massive problems going forward. The CSIR has already estimated that 90 to 100,000 jobs will be lost in Mpumalanga. And also there are indirect jobs that fit on that. So why then are we not doing it in our own time, in our own way, without being pressured? And we're being pressured by the world's biggest polluters. The very US that is saying to us, we are going to give you loans to close down and do all of these things. They went to assure their coal miners that, no, don't worry, your jobs are safe. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that we do things in our own way. And yet we are being forced. So what's just about that? So it's best that we meet face to face. I agree fully with that sentiment. And then all of us were able to engage on these documents face to face, because consultation must mean after you present it and then we ask questions, we must form some view. And then you must be able to tell us and also provide, you know, alternatives to what we have presented. And you must be able to tell us that if there are alternatives that you take, which ones, which one you won't take, which ones. That is meaningful consultation. But for us to hide behind cell phones and laptops and be, you know, discussing a future of, you know, of many people, I think we don't take this serious. And I don't believe that it is taking labor serious, because if you were taking us serious as the PCC, you should have understood that this issue, as much as it's important for us, it's about bread and butter. For us, it is, you know, it is about everything that we need to make sure that we guarantee the lives of our members, as much as we are committed to a clean climate environment. But we are trade union movements. Our primary task is to the livelihood of our members. And we need to make sure that not only the workers bear the burden of this transition, it's a societal issue. It's an issue for everyone, but it will seem that it's the working class who are the one who are made to take the fall. I mean, the very European countries who are giving us these loans, they say we must close down our power station, but they are buying the very coal that we are producing here. Are we not then living in the same planet? Which planet are they going to buy those coal? And then if we say ourselves that coal is not good enough, you know, to be used in South Africa, why is it good enough to be used elsewhere? And by that, I do not mean that we must not mitigate, but we must be researching on clean coal, and we must be continue to put energy security first. And that while we put energy security first, we then try to migrate within our own time and our own pace. Right now, this is just big money for the industrial economies in terms of loans and in terms of private sector companies. They are the ones who will make these billions. And where are we going to be left? If the next 5 years, that 2023, 27 to 27, we're talking about $8.5 billion, and we do not know. And we say, in the end, we might be going to 98 billion rands. Are we not going to be indebting the country and our future children to a transition that is rushed? So why must this transition cost us so much when we could be doing it in our own pace and in a way that will make sure that we put the imperatives of our country? Let's act in our own national security, as opposed to acting in the interest of the US. Those guys are acting in their own interest because they will be earning interest in those loans, which they will be giving us also in dollars, which is also another problem. And why are we not mobilizing resources domestically and so on and so forth? I think, you know, to take a decision and also try to rally us behind the decision in the name of consultation, the horse has bolted. It is as if you are just trying to marshal us to accept the plan and move and make sure that, you know, we are seen as if we're party to this whole thing, when in actual fact is a fait accompli. There's nothing just in how you are handling this thing. It needed a much more involved process. Why commit to an 8.5 billion in the first place if you don't know where the money is coming from? May that question be answered. Why commit in the first place if you don't have the money?
Yeah,
you are going to get it somewhere. So now we're scrambling. Let me end it there. I have a lot of things. Hence, I'm of the view that we must have a physical meeting so that at least we can put all our points without the problems of technology and also all other things that will make it difficult for us to speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Zolani. And I take all the points.
Thank you.
And please bear with us and let's bear with one another. I think it's important to give the platform so that conversations can happen. You are correct. We need to have these face-to-face and probably need to have them a whole day session so that time is not a problem in these discussions. I want to give an opportunity to the GS of the NUM. He is connected via Simpiwengem. I just want to give him an opportunity to make his reflections and then we'll go to the rest of the hands that are raised. GS?
Yeah, let me take this opportunity to thank you for organizing this meeting. Even though from the beginning, Labour was not happy as to how the meeting was organized, but we hope that in future the meetings will be arranged in time. I just want to raise a few issues. One is that the plan was presented, but I think the dilemma may be that if you look at the plan, in many areas, you ask yourself that how will I contribute to this plan? Because already is a plan that is also budgeted in particular areas. As comrades were raising that in this plan, you lack this and that. Then the challenge will be, we were not in the planning phase. The plan is already done. And I'm sure one can just ask that as Labour, if we were to find a plan like that and you have to contribute, how do you contribute? Because already the plan is there and figures are there. And mind you, you are not even the custodian of the money. The planner is the custodian of the money, has got the money, he knows how to budget within the money that he has. That's the first issue to say, how are we going to do that? There are loans that are raised that seems to be coming, and that will obviously come. I'm sure we will have made an experience with the current situation where ESCOM is. The danger that we are going to face as a country is we've got a problem with ESCOM that currently, as we speak, it owes billions to the tune of 400 billion. Now, while we still have that challenge, the solution that we take, again, is to do something that we more commit, again, on the debt, that today we don't have a solution as to how the ESCOM plan is going to be done. And the reality of the matter is all these plans, most of them, all these plans, they are going to end up killing the very same ESCOM that is having a debt. Now, who's going to be responsible for this debt that we are talking about now? Is that the government? We just want to know that who's going to be responsible for this debt that we are talking about. But the other issue is the planning. We understand that, and it's not something that we are violently opposing. And I'm sure from Labour, most of the time, the unfortunate part of it is that when you raise issues with people whose minds have already been concluded, you are irritating them. They expect to just tell you that this thing is going to happen like this, and then when your response must be, no, I agree with you. and immediately you don't respond as such, you irritate them. You irritate them because you will be asking things that they don't want to be asked. Ours is to be taken to confidence that, for example, currently we've got power stations, but it's true to some extent, but it's not wholly true that because we've got old power stations, therefore, that is the main issue. I always raise this issue that the problem with South Africa is that we are quickly concluding. In other countries, like comrades are raising, like you look at the Germany and others, the power stations that they are relying, going back to them, they are older than South African power stations. They are older than South Africa. Why do they go back and use power stations that are older than South Africa? In South Africa, we just stuck. You have got new power stations that has got big capacity, Kusile Midupi and the one for the hydro. They are not working. They don't even give the EAF that is above the old ones. The very same ones that we criticize, the new ones doesn't give it to that level. And the reality of the matter is that we know the problem of South Africa. I don't know how many percentage of this money that we are also talking about. And that is something that we must be told even from now, that how much or what percentage is going to go for corruption out of that money. And mind you, it is going to be a corruption that at the end of the day, South Africans must pay with their taxes, 18 point something. And the more we highly privatize, we know what is going to be the reality. Electricity will totally not be affordable. Let us talk all these things, but let us be on the reality and say, is the plans going to give us enough electricity? And with that electricity, it will be affordable to any person, even a person that is getting a grant, just to make it clear that can he still get the grant and still afford the electricity. So I'm just raising that as that. But the last issue that I also want to raise is that, yes, the plan is there. We can see the plan, that we want to also know that what are the areas that as labor, we are expected to make inputs, because we see the plan, but we don't know how rigid the plan is and all this and all this. Now, in the plan, we don't see that in implementing all these plans, what is going to be the employment statistics? Our concern as labor, the biggest concern, and I'm sure we must be clear, I'm sure as people that are responsible, you will also know that our interests are not the same. I'm sure the interest of the employers to them is to get electricity that they can make production uninterrupted. That will be their interest, to say, is this plan going to give us electricity that is uninterrupted in the future? If the answer is yes, they will buy it. To us as the labor, our areas that you must convince us is clear. Convince us to say, we want to move from the current source of energy to the new source of energy. But in terms of employment, this is how the employment is guaranteed. We understand that, yes, throughout the process, we will have people that are closer to exit either the coal power station, coal plants, coal operations and power stations. We understand, but show us, something that can be saying to us, in Mpumalanga, we've got so many mines. Out of those coal mines, this is the employment rate. And with this mitigation that we are bringing, this is how we're going to mitigate employment in the coal mines. And this is how we're going to mitigate employment in the power stations. And I'm sure if we're guaranteed and we're given something very tangible, clear plans, how the transition is going to move, I'm sure as labor, we can agree with you to say, as long as our job security of our members is guaranteed, we support it. As long as there is somebody that if things are not going to happen as we have been told, he will take responsibility, because the problem that we have here, and without maybe raising an issue, it is, to me, it is a problem that I take it that you have got people that are working in a project that will tell you something. Down the line, when this project is finished, they are nowhere to be found. They will no longer be accountable because their plan will have been done and they will have told you that this is what we are going to do. Because naturally, I will take it that this was established, and it was established based on those loans, and then obviously within a certain time frame, when this thing is finished, role players that must be responsible in doing all these issues, either they will not be there, who will then have to be taking responsibility and say, when we were talking with you, this is the employment that we were promising you, and this is how we're implementing that. So to us, I'm sure if we are guaranteed to that level, and the plan has got employment statistics that are guaranteed that indeed our current members and the future members that we're still going to recruit as they get employment in this sector, their job security is guaranteed. Probably, as labor, we are not violently opposing to any changes. There were many changes that happened during our time. Yes, all of them were scaring us, but at some times when implementation came, we acclimatize to the changes. But from time to time, like I would say, ours is that tell us more about job security, because that is the language that we want to understand out of this. Our interest is different from others. Our interest is there job security in this plan, and how are we going to see figures in those job security? To us, like I was saying, be practical. There is power stations in Mpumalanga, KZN, yeah, to some extent Gauteng, but Lephalale. What is the plan about decommissioning those areas? And I'm sure I asked this. As we decommission, like one comrade was saying, how many power stations do we believe that this one, whether decommissioning or not decommissioning, this one we are still going to keep them, because the reality of the matter is that there is coal. Is there no other technologies that we can manage the emissions, but still make sure that those power stations, whether we like it or we don't like it, they will always be there, so that when we have challenges with these other energy developments, then we can know that we always have a reserve where we can still go back. And let me leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nopal. Colleagues, just to indicate, we are running terribly behind time, and I do want to give everybody an opportunity to speak, but I also feel that it's important that we hand back to the presenters to give some responses to the concerns and questions that we've been raising. Can I then suggest that we do this? I'm going to, I see 7 hands on the platform right now. I'm going to note the 7 hands, and I'm going to request to give 2 minutes to each person that's going to speak. Quickly, precise, to the point, so that we can also afford an opportunity to the presenters to have an adequate time to respond to our questions. We've raised a number of issues. And then we also further commit to the further engagement. So in terms of hands raised, we're going to hand over to Rifta, and then we're going to go to Trevor. I see people have used Amogelang's login. So there's one Amogelang, there's a second one. We're going to hand over to Katlego, and then we'll hand over to, I think this is Tengo this time. And then the last one will be Simon. And then we'll hand over back to the presenters to give the response. Comrade Rifta, apologies, we have to limit the time. If we can make sense to 2 minutes.
All good, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. And once again, appreciation for the the presentations. We want to acknowledge that this is the first bite of the pie, and we are going to get into another session where there'll be a lot more detail. I'm going to try and summarize as quickly as possible with the timeframes that you've allocated now. Let me start off with the Just Financing Committee and the work that will flow from that particular point. As organised labour, it's important for us to be able to throw our weight behind the modalities where the financing will be tapped from or secured in order to take the vision and the ambitions of climate change and the just transition to another phase. So this is a very important point, and the comments that had already been submitted by FEDUSA, consolidated in the papers for the Just Transition Centre to be housed, is an important start to this conversation, and it's important that all the necessary sources be deployed to make this a winner. This is the ultimate. This is going to drive it forward. So the collective muscle, the collective will, and the political will in particular needs to be challenged there, because this is ultimately how we are going to make sure that for every job lost, a new one should be created. Ultimately, as the sentiments of the previous speakers echo, it is about job creation, ultimately for the jobs that will be sacrificed. So just financing is important, and all of us need to take ownership of this particular aspect that we're looking at. Madam Chair, I'm equally so going to move on to the aspects of whether it is developed or developing countries, first world or third world, that people still refer to. And when we talk about emissions, I think it's important for us to apply a little bit of caution to the wind, especially when we're taking a look at where we want to see South Africa going to. So when I say we've got to go slow to go fast, and I repeat that, we got to go slow to go fast, that we don't necessarily whip ourselves with our own cane here. The penalties that we talk about, we should apply considerable introspect. We should apply our minds to this and have an intelligent approach to it. We were not responsible for the emissions, and at the same time, we shouldn't be putting our hand up first to wanting to adjust and to mitigate, but at the same time, we shouldn't be taking it very easily on the fact that there are penalties. We cannot be penalized for matters that we didn't contribute towards. So we just have to be careful in terms of that conversation. In terms of skills, I think it's absolutely essential when we look at upskilling and reskilling. And once again, the political will that we had post-apartheid to transition to democracy. The Skills Development Act, the Skills Development Levies Act were catalysts in bringing us to where we are today. Possibly looking at something similar in terms of a modality to look at the conversations of skilling when it comes to not just the just transition in terms of climate, but the just transition in terms of skills and technology. Madam Chair, I'm going to make a last point now. When we talk about infrastructure, I fully agree that there should be aggressive investment in infrastructure. One of the points in the presentation spoke about EVs and many of the other technologies that we are looking towards in the future. China has rolled out mass infrastructure plans, so too we can use that as a launch pad, further job creation as such, but there's a lot that still needs to be discussed, and I'm sure we can unpack that during the second round of discussions. I do have a lot more, but I'm mindful of my time at this stage. But thank you once again. Let us look at this as a means to an end and not throw out the entire notion here. We are moving in the right direction, and we will most certainly get there. The events of the last 2 weeks, the floods, I'm sitting in Cape Town in absolute heat right now. We should be mindful of what the consequences are when we say, no, we don't necessarily want to embrace this. The realities are here now, and we have to face it head on, failing which not just all the other elements that have been identified, but we are looking at food security from a first perspective, albeit energy security. So I would welcome the next round of discussions. And once again, absolute appreciation to the commissioners on the platform, the Secretariat, and the collective that have organized this. But we are most certainly, as Fiducia, running with this process to make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Nopal. Trevor, your 2 minutes, please.
Thanks, Lebo.
Can you please also introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Trevor Shagu. I'm from SAFTU. No, I actually wanted to come on the proposition for procedure on the Q&A. I realized that there are a lot of questions which have been asked, and I thought that because they were detailed and even the answers had to be detailed, why shouldn't you stop here and allow for the respondents to be able to give answers to the questions which were posed? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trevor. Over and above the Q&A, I've been speaking to the Secretariat, and we just felt that we should wrap up the views of the final hands that have been raised. Over and above Q&A, we do want to hear what comrades have to say. The next hand, you're named Amogelang, but I doubt it's Amogelang.
It's Lizelle.
Hi, Lizelle. I thought as much. Lizelle, introduce
Thank you,
yourself.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. It's Lizelle van Kramberg. I'm from SAMU, Municipal Workers Union. No, Chair, I just wanted to quickly in my 2 minutes raise the issue of on the document with regards to long-term and short-term solutions. Long-term solutions speaks to finding ownership solutions that reduce inequality. But I want to say that we need to consider that, you know, as the adage goes, begin with the end in mind, that should not be post-2030, that finding ownership solutions should actually be at the beginning. And so we should put it in short-term solutions. Why am I saying this? Two things. One, energy is a public good. And, you know, there seems to be a sense in which as much as we talk about just transitioning, we are looking at privatization mostly through looking at alternative energy solutions with private companies. We support the Black-owned business, but I just also want to remind us that it's broad-based Black economic empowerment that needs to play a role. We don't want to create, again, a situation where we have a group of Black elite capitalists that emerges from this. And it's those kinds of capitalist principles and tendencies that actually always puts us into vulnerabilities to corruption and that. So, Chair, that one, community shareholding should be included from the outset in terms of all these alternative plans. Now there's urgency now, and in the urgency, I think one of the speakers was raising it to say, let's go slower in order to go faster. In urgency, we then end up with, you know, private ownership of these things, and in the long run, we won't have ownership solutions. We would have put ourselves into something that we can't get out of. So from the outset, we need to ensure that there's community or cooperative ownership to the energy space. And as well as previous speakers raised the role of the state, municipalities and municipal power utilities should be central in the alternative energy solutions for the immediate term. And also, remember, we have indigent, a big majority of our people are dependent on the indigent policies of municipalities, free basic electricity, et cetera. So if we make those people vulnerable to private companies, you know, and direct relationships with them, people will be put at risk for exploitation, et cetera. And so the municipality must be kept central in terms of ensuring that people are not placed at risk, taken advantage of by seemingly the attempt to privatize energy. So what I'm saying is that the broad-based empowerment and joint just transitioning should be kept in the principles of broad-based Black economic empowerment. and those can be built into whatever plans and MOUs and SLAs and all of that get signed, if it's public-private partnerships or whatever the case may be. And the municipality needs to play a central role in continuing to take care of the indigent, lower and medium income households. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Zell. Comrade Lee, you're next. Please also introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Lindy Lembele. I'm from Nehao. Thank you, Lebu. I maybe it's a question or a comment, but yeah, they will see from it. My question is with regards to the just part of the plan. I've been trying to actually see ways that just in the plan as it's being presented to us. Just a few examples, for instance, it talks to on the financing, it talks to private investment and loans from your developed countries. Then you put private investment and justice in the one sentence. It doesn't give you any justice to it. So in all this, instead, it looks like the plan is talking to the marketization of our energy, which then raises concerns on the cost of electricity going forward in the future. We already have a high cost of electricity as it stands. If you look at our the spending, the household spending, you will see that people, mostly households, they spend on electricity, including housing and water, 32% of their income. So we already have an issue of access through affordability when it comes to electricity. So now with the transition, it looks like we're going to have an issue of affordability again if we're going to have funding from a private sector that prioritizes profit before anything else. They're making this investment because they're expecting returns on their investment. So now you try again to look ways that just part, then in that we still don't see it. And then I'll go to the UNFCCC principle on financing. It talks to developed countries supporting developing countries in this jet IP transition or energy transition. And then what is the support? The support is actually giving loans to these developing countries. And then in developing countries having these loans, at the same time, it forces them to maintain some kind of financial prudence, which means that they find themselves indebted and having to reduce their debt. And in reducing their debt, government has to reduce its spending. So it goes to that. Then you look at how this impact on our macroeconomic policies. If government then decides to reduce spending as a result of trying to maintain financial prudence because of the loans that we have from these developing countries that have inflated the debt that we already have, then you have situations where public spending is cut, and the most impacted people here, it is the poor who already rely on delivery of public services like your social security, your issues of education. So it makes me question, where is the trust then in this, and where is the trust in supporting a country by indebting it? And then now they are sinking in this debt and trying to find ways to pay off the debt through cutting spending for its own people. So yeah, I'll just end it there. Thank you so much, Comrade.
Thank you very much, Comrade. Comrade Tengo, you're next. Tengo, are you there?
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Chair. Comrade Chair, I want to persuade. Pardon?
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Tengo Tengela. I work in the consultative policy unit as a trade and industry coordinator. I hope I've introduced myself. The other guy was speaking was not Tengo, Chair. Thank you. I'm the real Tengo. No, thank you very much, Chair. I think I want to persuade the meeting to do really the following. The first one, I think that we need to agree that this plan actually it's a very toxic, dangerous plan, which may militate against all what we seek to achieve as a country. That's my first proposal. And because of that, it's toxic in a sense that it has a huge potential to indebt the country. That's the first thing. Look at the composition of the financing of it. Most of it are loans, concessional loans, and all of those things. And there's no one who is clear about what are the conditionalities of those loans. That's the first part. The second thing is that this plan has a potential to pit trade unions against their members. We have a potential to actually having our members revolting against us as trade unions, because they will view us to be selling the little that the country has without any guarantee of the future. I'm saying this on the basis, one, the extent in which the Germans shifted from coal to renewables was on the basis that Germans themselves used their coal to finance that transition. I was part of the engagements. I was still in NOMSA at that point. But what the country is forced to do is to actually shoulder the burden of the shift with no guarantees, and leading a South African society turning against its own state. Because the manner in which the plan itself has been developed, there's not been thorough consultation with society, with trade unions, including with civil society formations. So that is the problem about the plan. And that's why I think that the plan has got to be rejected. What is being put on the table in terms of financing about the plan actually would not assist South Africa to diversify away from the current carbon to low carbon emissions. Actually, it has a potential to exacerbate the socio-economic situation that the country is facing, is dealing with when it comes to energy security and other things. So, I'm making the point that we need generally to reject the plan as it stands. The manner in which it's structured, it's not adequate. Actually, it's very dangerous to our society. So that's the first part. The second is the last point, Chair, I want to raise is the issue I raised about the consultation. I think a just a procedural, just consultation means that those who actually feel the pain must be able to also develop the medicine. You see, those who are injured must be the ones who must drive, who must also administer the medicine. So my point is this: when the commission, the first time the commission was conceptualized, it was that the commission would act as an institution of social dialogue between equal partners, labor, business, communities, and all the social partners that as they found in NEDLEC, to determine sectoral plans across different sectors. Now we have a plan that has not been developed through that process, that has not been consulted at a sectoral level, which does not have any voice of workers, the very people who are going to be affected by this transition. So the issues that I think the basis of rejecting is on the basis that the process itself has been very unjust, and therefore we need to go back to a just process that includes those who are affected, the mining communities, the workers in different sectors, business and government. So that is, I think, at the process level we need to follow. This is not consultation. This is what actually we rejected from the start when the Planning Commission was doing the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Comrade Simon. Comrade Simon, I know it's difficult to stick to the 2 minutes, but please try.
Sure. No, I'll try. Thanks, Comrade Lebu. And good afternoon, Comrade Simon Epple from SACTU, Clothing and Textiles in Kusatu. So Lebu, I'm not going to speak on the issue of the kind of neo-imperial aspects of international finance. I mean, I think the comrades have expressed those concerns really well. And I think those are legitimate concerns and outcomes and implications. I do think, though, you know, as the union movement, we need to have some of our own set of proposals, because it's really easy to kind of tell the negotiator you've got a really bad deal, but of course then it's the duty of the constituency behind the negotiator to say what it is that we want. So we may have to spend some time saying what it is that we want as a constituency. Like, you know, this might be bad, but therefore what is good? And you know, maybe that's a process that we need to outline. Obviously, some of the comrades have done that already, but most of those inputs are around outcomes. It's not around the nature of the finance. So we, you know, obviously comrades are worried about indebtedness and loans and conditionalities, but the largest concern that comrades are articulating is around outcomes. So we may need to consider what are some of the kind of preferred outcomes of a just transition, and then translate that backwards into, well, what does that mean for finance that enables that to happen? I want to put some on the table that have been touched on, but I'm not going to touch on the outcomes raised by other comrades. I mean, very briefly, obviously, you know, there's a need to end up with a capable, competent, and developmental state that can perform its duties, and comrades have expressed their views on that. But I think at the same time, we mustn't sort of fool ourselves into pretending that when we say something, it must happen, because the market doesn't wait for unionists to make a decision. And, you know, we are busy watching on the ground, for example, factories converting to solar, businesses converting to solar. So there's a danger that, you know, we spend endless amount of times defining exactly what we want. And by the time we've decided, the market's moved far behind us or in front of us, and we've lost our opportunity. So I do think we need to do this quite quickly. And Comrade Lebo, I want to throw a couple of things at you that at least from our perspective are important. The first one is, if and when the shift in energy generation is taking place, you know, the question is, how do we retain capacity in the state, in Eskom? Then the second one is, to the extent that it's being localized at a plant level, factories are putting on their own panels, businesses are putting on their own panels, how do we have more worker and community ownership? How do we find solutions that don't leave workers indebted? How do we have solutions that result essentially in income for workers that is equal or better to their wages that they currently get? Because remember, the just transition is not just transitioning the economy, but it's transitioning part of our ambition for what workers need in an economy. And if we can try and design an increasing shift of assets into the hands of workers and communities that provides them with incomes, and those incomes allow them not necessarily to have to work to get an income, then we've broken the stranglehold that work has over income. So you know, we do need to do some thinking about maximizing income for workers such that we can begin to replace incomes from work if necessary, and obviously solutions that deepen industrialization. So I want to just throw those onto the table for you, Comrade Lebo, but that doesn't take away or undermine comments made by others. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Simon. Comrade Katlego, you raised your hand after I counted the people that were going to have their last bite. So in the last minute, can I ask you to quickly have your say?
Thank you very much, Comrade Lebo. I just wanted to have my share in this discussion, and I'm very glad that South Africa seemingly has a very robust labor representatives. And it will do you very much good to include the labor representative in your planning, because as it seems like the plan is very vague, and it fails to really encompass the socioeconomic issues that are facing the country. Even from a climate perspective, it really does not make sense. It's because if you can look, the 1.5 trillion is not well accounted for. It's not very detailed where the money is going, because it just looks like you are throwing numbers around. Because even from your upskilling budget, it's very little, and it doesn't really seem to serve the labor market in South Africa. So I would like to agree with the labor representatives, like you need to invest in researching clean coal instead of decommissioning your existing power station, and actually invest in ensuring that you decarbonize your existing infrastructure before you even move into the, we all know that greenhouse gases are harmful, but we need to utilize them in a manner that is not going to be harmful to the environment. So I would really like you to be really transparent to labor, and your plan needs to really affect all the stakeholders. So my question is that what other stakeholders are you including? And then I would really suggest that you incorporate, you develop this plan in parallel with the relevant stakeholders instead of developing plans in silos. So I'm saying you're going to utilize 1.5 trillion, and you, in a few years later, you're going to say, let's decommission because you don't have your plan is not well thought out, and it can't really function and serve the interest of South Africans. Just like now, Kusile and Medupi are not functioning, and 300 billion has already been invested in those two newly built power stations. Lastly, I would say that if we are moving to a eco-friendly energy generation, we need to do it in a manner that is going to be sustainable, and it might just put us into the it might just put us in a global map where we can become a tourist attraction. But you need to really be detailed and be transparent. As you said initially, that you are committed to procedural justice. So please incorporate all the relevant stakeholders. And lastly, you plan, but I'll just go and read the whole just energy transition IP, but nuclear energy, I didn't see it, hydro energy, and other types of energies are not incorporated in your plan. So thank you very much. And I really wish that the labor representatives are well incorporated into this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for raising those very robust engagements. The reason why, and I've been speaking to the secretary, the reason why I've allowed the conversation to go as it has is because labor has not had their say. And I don't think we've been able to have this level of engagement with organized labor as the PCC. So I felt that, in the trade union movement, we have something called a listening campaign. So it's good to sometimes listen so that you know how to structure your plans. Deepak, Joanne, you have quite a number of things to address. Others are comments, and also bear in mind the fact that we are going to have a substantive session, taking into consideration how to co-create plans through a significant consultation session. But in the time that's remaining, if you could try and address as many comments, questions as you possibly can. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I must say, I found this both fascinating and challenging, and I want to thank all of the colleagues from the Labour stakeholder constituency for raising sometimes quite stridently issues related not only to process and procedure, but some of the issues related to what the content and elements of the transition should be. I want to say that while Joanne might respond to some of the specific issues that are raised, we from the PCC have been taking very copious notes on the issues that have been raised, and we'll pull those together. I don't particularly want to go into an answer to the questions in the chat issue by issue. Safe to say that on the question of concessional loans, the Minister of Finance, at least with respect to the two loans that were finalized last year between National Treasury and France and Germany, did in fact publish quite a lot of the detail with respect to those terms. At a high level, I want to say that those concessional loans, as Joanne pointed out in her presentation, are in fact required to be much more concessional than can be raised by the normal international market operations of National Treasury. And in the case of the loans that were finalized with the French and the Germans, those on average are 3.2 percentage points lower than what National Treasury, in the course of its own raising of finance in the international markets, it is more concessional by 3.2 percentage points better than that. Of course, it does also raise the issue with respect to what the need for the JET IP as it's currently structured and how that will be raised. I think a lot of the questions also relate to energy mix. They relate to whether the existing coal fleet can be extended in their life or not, and at what cost, but also at what levels of efficiency. I want to reiterate the point I made earlier and suggest that we make a note of all the points raised and commit, which I'm hoping Crispin will also come into the conversation before the end of the session, and commit to perhaps a full day detailed session with the Labour constituency on many of these questions. But I just want to assure colleagues that we are committed to listening, to also finding responses and finding each other as we undertake this just energy transition going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. You can jump in.
Okay, thank you. And I think that comrades will remember that we changed the order of the session around when we started. And so I think, Comrade Lebo, what we haven't had is the first presentation, which, as I understand it, is a much broader conversation around the energy transition. So I think that a number of the points that were raised are really issues that we need to debate in the context of what does the energy transition in South Africa look like. It's the question of how fast, how slow, what is the energy mix, where do renewables fit in to a much broader energy mix, and how fast or how slow should we be going as a country and for what reasons. And I do still think that we need to be able to have that presentation and use it as a basis for maybe taking those points that I think a number of comrades raised as the basis in order to be able to go into depth in that conversation. So I think that we've ended up with a whole lot of in a sense, unresolved issues that need a lot more conversation. And so I think the proposal of a further session and a day-long session is really important, and that we think quite carefully about how we want to structure that so that we can take those conversations from their beginning to the end. Just a couple of points that I want to pick up around this investment plan. I think, firstly, in terms of assumptions, this investment plan presumes a diverse energy mix. It looks at one element of that, which is the renewables element of that. And it is framed within the context of a long-term reduction in emissions and a long-term reduction consequently in the amount of coal that we use in our energy mix. So I think to understand that we are not saying that this slice of the energy mix is the whole thing and that it's substituting for everything that we have at the moment, but it is saying that there is a direction, and that what we need to do is to structure that in a way that is the best possible for the greatest number of workers and communities in our country, and use it as an opportunity to create for localization, for economic diversification, and to be able to utilize the possibilities that it offers in terms of resolving the energy security problems that ordinary people have. I think in that context, to go right to the end and to the point that was made by the comrade from SAMU, which is we take the point around BBBE, and we take the point about starting with community ownership. And I think that there is certainly a commitment and a set of allocations in order to be able to, in practice, start to say, what does that look like in our country, and how do we make it a significant part of our economy in order that we can actually spread the potential benefits. So to give you an example, in China at the moment, there is a program that is being rolled out countrywide that aims to put solar panels on the roof of every single household in China. I don't see why we shouldn't be doing that in this country, and why we shouldn't be starting doing that with poor households. So I think there are opportunities that will generate a whole set of potentially of positive benefits for the country as a whole. I note the point that people have made about loans. I think the other thing to point out is that institutions such as Eskom are seen as central and having a long-term future in this plan. So in the work that has been done, and I think a number of people have raised questions around the assumptions and the fact base, as I said in the beginning, the last 100 pages of this document sets out all of that in great detail. And in that, the allocation is quite significant to Eskom. We see utility scale generation of power and utility scale infrastructures having a role to play in South Africa for a long time to come, and the plan is built around that. So quite a significant proportion of that allocation for electricity goes to Eskom. And there is a potential for other state-owned companies looking to decarbonize to also be the beneficiaries of some of these resources. In terms of, I think the issues around process have been dealt with. I do think that in relation to the conversation around decommissioning, what this plan looks at is not only the decommissioning of power stations, and it's actually quite modest. One is looking at 3 out of the entire Eskom fleet. One is looking at a period over 5 to 10 years at another 3 facilities, and not all of them, not all of them in totality. And what we're looking at is how do you repower them? And I think that the way you look at repurposing and repowering is by a range of means of taking that infrastructure and powering it using renewables, using gas, potentially using batteries, I know there is a lot of work being done internationally, and modular nuclear is being looked at internationally, and maybe that is a possibility for South Africa. So we are not presuming that there is a wholesale closure of coal plant. We understand that there is going to be coal in the South African power system for a long time to come, but it's going to be coal power in a very, very different context internationally. And I think the question of how we then engage with that context internationally and the implications that it has for our country and for workers is maybe another really important conversation that we need to have in the day-long session, because I think that as a small and open economy, I think the problem that we have is that we can't control the pace of a lot of this. So if by 2035, Europe does stop allowing internal combustion engines to be utilized, we need to be very clear by then, what is the future of our automotive industry, and what are we going to do to make sure not only that the current jobs in that industry are retained, but that new jobs are created going into the future, and that the industry has a future. So I think that I take the point that Comrade Richter made about going slow in order to go fast, but I also think that we do have to have a conversation around, given the fact that we locked into a global economy and a globalized trade system, what is in our control, what isn't, what is the time frames that we need to be working to, and what can we do to, in fact, guarantee our own futures, the futures of our industry and the futures of workers. So I would urge that we have that conversation as well in the day-long session. I think that we also maybe need to talk a little bit about some of the other opportunities. So, for example, the new mineral, we haven't talked at all about the opportunities for the new minerals value chain. Right across the world, there is a major boom in the mining industry across the world as mines are being opened up to provide the metals and the minerals that are necessary for a new energy economy. And we haven't even begun to touch on that. But I think the opportunities of building new value chains, new energy, building on our existing capacity in the country. We have huge embedded capacity around mining in South Africa. How do we ensure that mines, if a mine closes, that another mine opens up? How do we ensure that we retain our competitive advantage in relation to our mining industry in the context of a just energy transition? And I think that that is another one of the kinds of conversations that we should be having. Yeah, I think I'm going to pretty much stop there. Just one quite specific thing on the issue of medical services that I think it was Comrade Gideon raised. I think that certainly when we talk about infrastructure and social protection in this plan, the issues of health and the health-related effects of climate change are very definitely included. And I thought I should just lastly clarify that. So I think I want to finish there and to say that I think this is a critical engagement. We talk about the just transition as a whole of society transition. And I think that means, on the one hand, some very looking at where we all come from and our differences, and having the kinds of conversations, the robust conversations, in order that we actually can find whatever the middle ground is that allows us to move together, because we do have to move together as a country on this and many other issues, including the fact that we need to move together on resolving our current energy security problems, which are already starting to have a devastating effect on workers and on businesses. And where at the moment we also have to get through the failure of our coal economy to be able to keep the lights on and keep the economy moving. So I think there is a current crisis, and we have to say clearly, what do we need to do to sort that out within the context of the coal economy? But what else can we do in order to resolve that problem right now in the next year or two? And maybe look at the plan in the context of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you, Deepak, for giving us those initial responses and initial feedback in terms of the issues that were raised. It was a comprehensive, very long, but a needed discussion that needed to happen and take place. I'm mindful of the time. We've run out of time in terms of today's engagement, but I think the process is clear. There definitely needs to have a more substantive follow-up engagement where we will deal extensively with the issues of energy planning, because a number of the questions that I picked up were really about energy planning and its intersectionality with a just energy transition plan. And those are the issues that we probably need to reconcile in this one-day physical meeting, where we will continue to engage, continue to discuss these very pertinent issues, and also come up with solutions and co-create those solutions together. With that said, colleagues, let me then pass on to my colleague, Comrade Jack. You're a fellow commissioner. Let me hand over to you to do closing remarks.
Comrade Labour, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, I've been tasked to close this session. We've run well out of time, but I think the discussion was valuable in the sense that we're collaborating. As Dr. Cuspian outlined in the beginning of beginning, the PCC has been mandated to consult stakeholders on the JET-IP and make recommendations to government on how South Africa might take into account the carbon constraint in our energy planning and governance. This session was but one of a number of the planned integrated sessions that will take place over the next few weeks with a number of stakeholders and other groups nationally. Let me start by thanking everyone that, despite the number of challenges, that joined and stayed on the line for this session. As undertaken by Secretariat, a follow-up session will be scheduled. The date of will be communicated soon. To our chair, during an initial difficult time, and the PCC Secretariat, a big thank you. To the honourable presenters, Joanne, as always, professional. Deepak, thank you for your insights. Thank you for assisting in enriching our understanding of this very important, but all the same, very complex issue. And I think everybody would agree with me. My takeaway is a massive gap between that desired state of the JET-IP and the current state that we are currently finding ourselves in, and the potential funding gap, amongst others, to take us to that desired state. Hence my absolute support for the ongoing collaboration and dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. Comrades, take care. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jacques. Beautifully handled.
Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Chair, for
Bye,
steering.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Comrade Level.